So I think I'll slowly get started while people are still trickling in. This is the second of our 4-part webinar series. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Those of you who are joining a second time, it's so lovely to have you back and see some familiar faces and names. First and foremost, we know that this is the first or second week back at school for many of you who are tuning in. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being here with your tired bodies and tired minds. We really appreciate you sharing your time and your energy with us tonight. Again, our intention for this 4-part series is to help you and support you in the best way that we can during these extraordinary times, with some suggestions for getting outside in a good way and in a naturally curious way. So welcome, my name is Rosa and I'm the program manager for Natural Curiosity. I'm also a guest on Turtle Island. And Natural Curiosity, for those of you who are less familiar, is an environmental education program that is housed at the Dr. Eric Jackman Institute of Child Study Laboratory School, which is a school, an inquiry-based school that's been around since the 1920s, that is part of OISE, University of Toronto. And so can everyone hear me okay? Because I see a comment that says you can't hear. So, okay, just letting you know that it's heard. I think the audio is working. Thank you. And I'm also joined by some lovely members of our team today, including Brenda, who is our interim program director, and Danielle, who just joined the team as our coordinator. And we also have our awesome work study team supporting us with the tech. And here at Natural Curiosity, we support educators all across Turtle Island with incorporating an inquiry-based approach to environmental learning, as well as the importance of Indigenous perspectives into their practice. Most recently through the 2nd edition resource, which we hope to be unpacking a little bit more tonight. And so now I'll pass it off to Asha for some tech housekeeping notes.
Hi everybody. Before we get into the webinar today, we do have a couple housekeeping notes for all of you, so please stay muted today so we can hear the presenters clearly. To make sure you're muted, you can mouse over the mic button at the bottom left corner of your screen. If you can't see the toolbar there, you should be able to see it as you mouse over that corner. The mic should have a little red line through it. As well, keep your video turned off, just so the webinar can run smoothly. We do have about 290 people joining us today. We hope you're all here. And so we're using the Zoom meeting feature, so more videos tend to slow it down. If you have any questions, or if you're having any kind of technological difficulties, you can private message any member of the NC team. We're easy to find. We've all got NC at the front of our names. So you can do that by selecting us in the to field on the chat feature up along the left-hand side of your page. We're also recording the webinar for you all to access later. So you'll receive that by email along with the chat records of our discussion and a list of resources that come up in conversation today.
Thank you, Asha. So tonight's webinar format is going to be a little bit different from the last one. So thank you all for your feedback. And here's an overview of how the next 90-ish minutes will flow. We mentioned in our last webinar that we would like to share a little bit more about land acknowledgements. And so we're excited to welcome Krista Spence to share the students' land acknowledgement with us today. And after that, we have Doug Anderson and Maria Vamvalis each share a presentation followed by a conversation. And following their conversation, we'll read out your questions that have come through the chat in a 20-minute Q&A. And so this is a dedicated time for your questions to our guests and our team. Oh, there is annotation that's being done on the screen. Sorry about that. We're going to turn that off. But you're, of course, welcome to contribute ideas and questions and comments via chat throughout the webinar. And finally, in the last 10 minutes, we have some exciting announcements about new initiatives and resources from Natural Curiosity, as well as an exit ticket and poll. So please stick around until the end if you're able. Your feedback is really, really appreciated and important to us. And after closing, if folks still have burning questions about anything, we will stick around for an additional 10 minutes. And I will turn off the annotation in 1 second. Thank you. So yeah, this is the big question that we ended off our last webinar with. And so it was about gratitude and living in reciprocity with all our relations, and just wanted to, start with that mindset that we ended up in the last webinar and present it to those who haven't seen this question, which comes from the second edition. And in tonight's webinar, we hope to be exploring this question a little bit more with Doug and Maria, and exploring more key principles and ideas that are laid out in Natural Curiosity 2, and particularly the Indigenous lens. And we'll be discussing them with the author himself, Doug, and of course with Maria, who brings lots of expertise connected to what Doug is going to be talking about, and also all of this in relation to the current COVID reality. And so finally, I am now excited to welcome Krista. Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing and turn that off. Give me 1 second. Okay, great. Krista, do you want to share your slides now?
Sure. Okay, can everybody see it? Okay, so my name is Krista Spence, and I'm the teacher librarian at the Institute of Child Study. I've played a different role in the library. I've been a classroom teacher, and now because of COVID, I'm a nursery teacher. So things are shifting because of COVID all the time. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that, and to kind of just know that we are in a different place today than we were when we created this. We have different ways of working with the kids, and it's all part of the challenges of this time. And so when I was looking back and thinking about doing it, I had sadness because it's different right now. So I just want to acknowledge that as teachers, as educators, we're going into these spaces and it's a different space than it was before, and it will continue to be a different space. So so I just wanted to say that, and I'm grateful to people for asking me to come here and talk about this land acknowledgement kind of project that happened. I wanted to say that land acknowledgements are contentious anyways, and we know that land acknowledgements can be performative and not really helpful. And so I was really aware of that, and that was actually the frustration that the students had and where this came from. So I will share more of my process after I read the land acknowledgement, but I just wanted you to know that piece. So I'm going to minimize the number of people I can see so I can be sure to read the slides. So this was created in 2019, which was the last time I had a grade 6 class until the end of the school year. So that's where this came from. We begin with acknowledgement of the land, because we will be using the land and need to respect this place where Indigenous people lived and continue to live. We wrote this to share some of our learning and to teach others. We thought about who would be hearing it, and we didn't want to make it too complicated or too simple. We would like to thank the first peoples of this land and all of creation, including the animals, plants, land, water, air, rocks, trees, and all that exists on this beautiful earth. We honor the Indigenous people whose traditional territories included the land on which we gather today, the Petun, the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and other nations, whose names we no longer remember because of the impacts of colonialism. We want to honor the treaties that were made with the land and between First Nations and the Crown. Treaties should be honored, no matter what political party is in power. The story of Canada that most of us know is not the whole story. We've been learning from Indigenous sources about losing language and culture through residential schools, and also about ceremony, celebration, and strength of community. When we are thinking about doing something to the land, like building dams or pipelines, we should ask Indigenous people first, because they lived in balance with nature for thousands of years. We've lost our relationship to the earth by doing things like polluting and taking too much. We need to ask ourselves, what is more important? What I get out of this, or what happens to the land? We need to think 7 generations ahead. What we do today, how will that affect tomorrow? We invite you to do the same. Thank you. So I'll just speak to one piece right now, which is connects with this slide, which is that signpost that you see. This is part of having our students understand what this land is and what the importance of it has been for a long time. We put the names of the 4 directions in the 2 main languages, Indigenous languages in our area, the Mohawk and Anishinaabe-Moan. And then we chose to put the 4 waterways that we know how much water is impactful and connects people and is the way that people move and do trade and all kinds of things. And so I really wanted the kids to understand that. And we know that the words of these places and the words in Indigenous languages especially tell about those places. And so we have the 4 waterways that are in the 4 directions from here, the big ones. So Lake Ontario, the Don River, Lake Simcoe, and the Humber River. And we have them also in the Indigenous languages. And I'm looking forward to this post being a piece of communication and a piece of connection and a place for learning and for relationships. So we are inviting Indigenous teachers and knowledge keepers to help us unpack those pieces with the students. And there are little holes underneath, so you can see that there are places for additional teachings that might come that the students would then be able to create their own images or artwork or words or whatever would make sense. So kind of opening up the space to those relationships to happen and making places for that to occur is one of the priorities I find for me in the role that I've taken on as a librarian. I'm just going to stop sharing now. Let's stop share. Okay. And so I just wanted to say a few words about how it came up as the children were frustrated. So we looked at a number of land acknowledgements that were used by universities, colleges, schools, and the points of their frustration were so powerful and so valid and so exactly what adults have been reflecting and feeling, and about how could you thank something that you took it, so this makes no sense, and pieces about that who should be helping us write this and who should be in the room and who should be approving it. And so we decided to do the work and then take it to an elder that I had a connection with and get him to help us with it. The students also have watched land acknowledgements by Michael White, who's an Indigenous advisor at the University of Toronto, as well as Nigan Sinclair at the launch of Natural Curiosity 2nd edition, gave a beautiful land acknowledgement. And so I wanted them to hear those voices in thinking about what a land acknowledgement could be and what it means. And so we also looked at Hayden King, who is at the Yellowhead Institute, and his article saying that he regretted writing a land acknowledgement for Ryerson University because of the way that it's being used. And you could have, it was silence in the room at the moment when I read that, because it wasn't what the students were expecting me to share with them, but it was such a great critical thinking piece for them. And then after the land acknowledgement was written, I actually went to a session where Hayden King was there. And so I approached him and asked him to take a look at it and explained our process a little bit. So this has been a vehicle for connection and community and learning, and it continues to be so, and it's not set in stone. And that's the other important piece. The children really wanted it to be a way for people to learn. And so they were trying to think about how would a grade 2 or a grade 1 learn about land acknowledgement, and what would be some little pieces of information that we could share with them, because the children acknowledged that the land acknowledgement is a teaching opportunity, and it is a moment to think about our space in a way that some people might not think about that much. And so when I asked the grade 2s what a land acknowledgement might be, they really connected with the land and the birds and the water and really those aspects. And that's why those got into our land acknowledgement as well. You'll see in the image, there was 3 really young children, 3-year-olds, looking at the quahog shell that is used in wampum. And so having something to hold and to touch is helpful in that piece too. So, and these grade 6s had about 10 lessons, maybe 15 lessons about various topics that kind of springboarded from my look at Orange Shirt Day, and then wanting something to celebrate the accomplishments and the community and the beautiful parts of indigeneity. And I didn't want it to be just Orange Shirt Day and a dark chapter. So that's where I started with teaching and sharing stories about powwow and going from there. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of how we went about creating this land acknowledgement. We missed last year during COVID. I felt it would be a very hard project to take on in a virtual way. You can read the article about what I did during COVID time in the Natural Curiosity newsletter from August, which had to do more with connecting children to the lands and also to amazing voices that they maybe wouldn't have heard otherwise. So I think that is all I need to say right now about land acknowledgements, except that I want to thank all the people that have listened and heard and that I've gotten to learn so much from. So that is all that I would say right now. There's also additional information if you want to look at those pieces from Hayden King or those resources and things that we looked at. I've included them for Rosa to share out afterwards. And there's also a poster about some of my work over the past number of years, building our collection of Indigenous voices and sharing that in the library.
Thank you so much, Krista. Yeah, for sharing the story. Like, the land acknowledgement is such a beautiful living document at the school, and I know that it'll continue to grow as our community continues to learn and grow and change as well. So thank you so much. I'll pass it off to Brenda now. Brenda, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, thanks, Rosa. So my name's Brenda, and I am a settler on Turtle Island. I am also the interim program director at Natural Curiosity. I just want to take a moment to thank you, Krista, for sharing your process with the students, but also to acknowledge that while we and many other environmental educators have now been joined by public health advisors in pointing to outdoor education as a solution to this crisis, learning on the land is not novel. It's not a revolutionary idea. It's the way of knowing and being that has been practiced here on Turtle Island by diverse Indigenous nations since time immemorial. So I feel like that's a little gloss that I'd like to add to our land acknowledgement today. And also to paraphrase Doug from Natural Curiosity, we know that we are all facing very challenging times, and our solutions will be specific to our particular circumstances and our particular communities. But it's important for us to recognize that we are here tonight, not as experts, but as a community of educators and learners in our own lifelong learning process. And we're hoping to share that process with all of you. So this is only one step in a lifelong process that will be different for all of us. And we know that teachers are facing incredibly challenging times and long, exhausting days. So we're really glad that you're all here tonight. It is my honor to introduce Doug Anderson, one of the co-authors of Natural Curiosity, along with Julie Comey, who will be presenting at a webinar later on in the year. Doug is Métis Bunji, and his family is originally from Reedy Creek and Kinnesota, Manitoba, and BC, and he grew up here in Ontario. He's been consulting on Indigenous education and program development across Canada for over 25 years. He's especially interested in learning in the land in urban settings and is committed to these forms of knowledge as models for thinking and problem solving in the 21st century. So welcome, Doug, and it's over to you now.
I got my unmuted. I'm getting a message. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. So I guess I want to give thanks to everyone who's come on here and to the people who've organized this. And I guess where I'm starting or coming from is that question, like, what do we do now after this land acknowledgement? What do we do in this situation that we've now entered into? And I was kind of forced in thinking about that to pedal back from the question that was left with this process in the last webinar to the first branch on that lens. And the question was, you know, for me, how do we light the fire? What does that even mean? Much of what was written in that lens was designed to just kind of, people asked, you know, can you, I was brought in and asked if, can you help us indigenize this? And I said, no, but we can sort of try and put some perspective onto what's being unpacked in the Natural Curiosity resource. And so this lens is sitting there at a level of fairly high principles, but it's not quite something that I think teachers, you know, it's lovely to read and it actually can stir you in a certain way, I hope, but it's not something that necessarily gives you a real, maybe clear sense of how you actually do it. And probably for me, the most challenging side of that is this question of how we actually answer that question, what it means to light the fire. The stuff that's going on now, reopening in a pandemic, with fires going on in the wrong way and floods and so on. A lot of the other things that are happening that are quite distressing. I had to think about that as well. And if I had to say what this means in this moment, just from my own feelings, my own heart, it's that we all need to give you as teachers a chance to slow down and almost even slow down around something like, what is that fire? Slow down around that fire, and even stop as much as we can, and sort of really ask about where we are and where we're going, without rushing it. So I thought about it and I decided I wanted to share, even though we have very limited time, I wanted to share a short video that Rosa's going to play. It's just 2.5 minutes, I think. And it's something I'm sharing with kids. And the kids I work with are mostly, I mean, I haven't started yet. We're still getting into the classrooms, but the classrooms in Toronto, unless it's Wandering Spirit Survival School, are usually a class of non-Indigenous students with maybe one Indigenous student in the classroom, or none, and usually a non-Indigenous teachers. And I just want to play this, and then I'm going to speak to it. So you can go ahead and start that, Rosa. Thank you. While she's getting that started, oh, there it is. Well, I guess we have a tech issue. We can't really hear it.
Meaning things to come. And so we know from the old prophecies of the past.
Sorry, I will start that again.
This is Isaac Murdoch. I'll explain it, but go ahead.
Yes, Isaac Murdoch.
For my people, the sicknesses that are happening today was foretold from the prophecies that were passed down from our old ones. We call them enrich, meaning things to come. And so we know from the old prophecies of the past, there is a lot of traditional practices that can help us add volume of knowledge needed for the present times of sickness. For example, it was foretold that people would need to make their own dishes out of wood and never to share them. They were also told of the plant and animal remedies that would be useful during such times. Through the ceremonies and visions of our medicine peoples, it was advised that families needed to self-isolate on the land. When they did this, they would be okay. This all came from prophecy. This all came from ceremony. Our elders always remind us, all of the laws that are being broken right now is what's causing the sickness. Because of this, we have to go back to the old way of life. That's what they always talked about. The elders are constantly reminding us to go back to the land because it's the biggest and most powerful healthcare system we have. The medicines are a part of the answer, and so is being part of the land. We are the land, and the land is ceremony. We're often reminded that hoarding and being greedy is part of what causes the sickness. So if we want the sickness to go away, we have to give. We can't hoard anything. This protects us and takes power away from what feeds the sickness. I believe that we're in a sacred story now, and that 1,000 years from now, they will be telling this story of when the two-legged tried to destroy the earth. I really truly believe that right now, if we follow the natural laws of the land, everything will become beautiful again. Everything will be okay. I remember years ago, my great-great-grandfather said, you know what? We need to go home. We have to go back. And it's okay to do so because that's where we're going to learn to live again. Chi-miigwetch. Thank you.
Thank you. The reason I wanted to share this is because when he shares this, he's made a decision. Isaac is Anishinaabe from North Shore between Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie. And, you know, some people have made decisions to share some of the perspectives that that have been given to them, gifted to them through their culture in public ways, in very open ways. And first of all, I think he's sharing this message with his own communities and people out there, but clearly putting this out in general is, it's consumed by many of us who are in the city, and we're immediately challenged by this question of, you know, go home and get back on the land, get back to the old ways of life and so forth. And I think what I want to speak to in the sort of limited time we have today is just how I'm trying to do that with the contexts we have, these difficult contexts we have in an urban context. And the first thing I had to think about, you know, when I'm thinking about what that means to go home, I mean, I'm part of a diaspora that left Manitoba in the 50s, mainly for economic reasons. And how do we find that? And I think that's related to this first chapter, this first branch of the Natural Curiosity resource. Many of us can't go home in the sense that he's decided to do that within his own territory. So he's doing that. He's going out in the bush and having language camps and doing those kinds of things. How do we do that with kids who may be from Syria in an urban setting? How do we do that with kids who are living in that really diverse urban setting. And I had to come back to that first branch, and it does connect to what he's talking about. When he says the land is ceremony, we may not have, most of us have the ability to have land-based ceremonies, although that is happening in Toronto with Indigenous people and across the country. But what we can have is a heart. We all have a heart. And I think in that chapter on lighting the fire, what it's really challenging us to do is to actually think and speak from a deep place inside of us. And it's challenging us to actually not speed up and address all of these things that are happening around us, all these catastrophes that are unfolding from a place of panic. All respect to Greta Thunberg. It's actually asking us to slow down and have some kind of center, some kind of centering process. So how have I been doing that? That's all I can share. It's just my own truth. It's not a prescription. What are we being invited to do? It seems like, it doesn't seem like it's usually an option for most educators to just walk out of the school. And in fact, this is the case with the Toronto District School Board. There are barriers to leaving the school grounds. There are barriers to having the right ratio of adults to children, because having external visitors, especially in a pandemic, is a challenge. It's something that they've made even more difficult to do. And so, in spite of all that, what I'm feeling and what I'm hearing from teachers and principals is a sense that we need to try. We need to try anyway. And so what I've been trying to do is to meet with administrators and teachers and try to find ways to bring the children out every day in parks, around the perimeters of their schools, and in neighborhoods, and to bring them into relationships with what's directly around them outside on the land. But not on the basis of all of our systemic priorities, which we still need to live with and contend with, but on the basis of what Isaac's referring to in this video. So he references natural laws. He says, the laws that are being broken are what's causing this sickness, the pandemic. So with that video and with some of the other cultural resources that have been generously shared across the country by people who have published their stories, we're actually asking with children what natural law is. What does it mean? And it's actually, it's a way of opening very different conversations and projects that continue and grow in relation to that question, rather than systemic kind of ways of doing things. So a one-off field trip will not answer that question. But if we have the children going out and developing relationships with people in the neighborhood, or developing relationships with sites in the neighborhood, and taking responsibility for them, we're suddenly forced into different kinds of questions. As teachers, you don't have the luxury of taking this approach without a lot of additional support. So I am aware that schools like the Jackman Institute of Child Studies have additional resources. But the other schools in the TDSB have a lot less freedom. And so I want to share a quick story about what I've done with, Rosa, you can move on from this slide if you like. A quick story about what we've done today. I mean, I went out with a woman who's a mother with 2 kids, an Indigenous woman who's decided to take care of a patch of land on some train tracks right in the center of town. And it's in sad shape. And she's been planting food and medicine. And there can be no prescription for how we center learning around that kind of activity. but there's a school in the neighborhood. And I'm asking how we can, there's quite a few schools in the neighborhood, and I'm asking how we can bring the students down to that site in distanced ways, in small groups, to take risks, but also to, and there's a lot of administration involved in doing that. And to get them out there in ways that bring additional resources from academia, from the municipal government, and from any sort of stream of learning or place of professional ability, administration, law, and challenge those other people who are not ordinarily involved in learning to center their work, or at least a part of their work, in ways that support the children's line of inquiry. Krista, when she was talking about the actual land acknowledgement and the ways that the children's questions completely challenged how it's usually done in institutions, raised a really important point. Children are asking questions that that people my age and people in systems of education or systems of higher learning aren't really empowered to ask, but we have to help them prepare to answer those questions. And so what I'm doing and what other people are doing is going into post-secondary, I'm going to people at U of T, and I'm bringing grad students out, and I'm saying, we're setting assignments for you that are going to help us map all of this. We're setting assignments for you where you're going to go down and find out where all the power lines are, who the local counselors are, who the people who have sort of, what sort of administrative barriers have been set up to challenge what this woman's doing, including the kinds of barriers that you're facing as educators. Because we all know there's a lot of work involved in convincing superintendents and school administrators to take the kinds of risks that are involved in getting children to do what's on the screen here. It can be done, but we need more people working on it. And so when Isaac shares in that video that, it's important for us to return to natural laws, it's a very, very, very simple thing. It's a way we're actually lighting the fire. And there are literally fires being lit out there. But we are challenging people in systems without attacking them to consider what these natural laws are, what these original instructions are. And if we've been breaking them, which we have been, then what portion, and even if it's a small portion, it's going to have a huge impact. What small portion of their time and energy can be devoted to helping these students, these children, to answer the questions they have? And the questions they have are huge. I've had 7-year-olds ask me, what are we going to do when we run out of concrete? Well, we'll need, to challenge people who are at the Rotman School of Business to sort of move away from their corporate templates for a moment and help answer that question. And water engineers and chemists and so forth. There's this touches on every stream in the curriculum. And this isn't a question of whether we can do this. It's more a question of how it needs to be done. And it's going to happen. I have to share that with you. And in that, I've already run out of time, but what I've really been trying to get across here is that there's something moving. And as teachers, as you're re-entering into these classrooms and schools in the middle of a pandemic, the barriers to getting children outside every day on the land are going to vary, but in general, they're going to be quite prohibitive. And what we need to do in our communities is move in the direction of gathering people around that heart, the children. The children are the heart. right? And no one's going to be able to deny you that. If you can move through a few slides, I'm just going to wrap quickly with, I'll come back and answer any questions. They are literally lighting fires. Keep going. I just wanted to share, these are just pictures of my front yard. Isaac came for a visit for some spaghetti, and he came out and looked at this and he said, oh, you could save a lot of lives with this. There's 53 medicines out there. We're setting up, if you go to the next slide, there's a little path in there where you can just go in and sit. We're doing this on sites right across the city. There are Indigenous people landing on different watersheds. This woman who's on the Dawn is only one. There's a woman who's working with Indigenous community people, agencies on another river system in Scarborough. There's a lot of people landing on the Humber and so on. And we're planting medicine. And children are going to be able to go out and spend time with these things and really be in that space and feel it. But my son is here. I'm talking to 178 people. If you go to the next slide, if you go through the next few slides, we're doing it in relation to these gifts and these stories that have been shared with us. So I encourage you all to look into Isaac's resource is one, but some of the people at Natural Curiosity have been looking into other stories that they've been able to unpack a little bit. And the question becomes, how do we sit with children outside and help them feel what these stories mean? If you're in a context where you can't really see yourself accessing those kinds of resources that I've been talking about, and there are many here in Toronto that are starting to come to in and sort of support how these sites are explored with children. I want you to, don't want you to sort of end this sort of short workshop webinar feeling like I'm alone in whatever part of the country I'm in, and you know, that's fine for them there where there's 2 universities or 3 or 4 universities, I've lost count, and a lot of resources and a lot of Indigenous agencies and so forth. If you go to the last few slides, there are these resources that Indigenous people are starting to, they've been putting out, and there's some really good stuff. But there are also people across the country, there are groups of parents and community people and educators who are asking, how do we gather around the children? The Unschooling School link and the For Our Kids, I'm not saying these are the only people who are doing this, but there's certainly two groups that are national and probably moving towards an international focus, who are starting to network these questions around, and they're like me, they're like you, they don't have all the answers, but they're saying, my God, we've reached a point where we need to stop, we need to slow down, and we need to help our children. We need to help prepare our children for what's coming. And so I encourage you, if you are on your own out there in a place where you might feel, you know, that you don't have access to the kinds of things I'm quickly referring to begin networking and begin talking to people and begin talking with parents, obviously. The parent associations are an important part of all of this. So I'm going to stop there because I've gone about 5 minutes over time, but I really want to stress that I hope that what we're sort of quickly laying out here today, which isn't going to, you know, give you something to walk away with and very, you know, in a matter of weeks, begin answering that question of how we come home, how we circle around and pivot everything we do so that we're actually responding to natural laws rather than to the ways we've been breaking them, the systems we've had of breaking them. But I want these sort of things that we're sharing today to inspire you to continue to develop ways of, as professionals, supporting each other. We all need to slow down, not speed up. And in slowing down, I'm hoping we can really deepen our way of sitting with these questions. That first branch of natural curiosity is all about taking care of yourself and following your heart, taking care of your heart. So thank you. And I think we're going to hear from Maria next. Chi-miigwetch.
Thanks, Doug. I love what you say about slowing down and getting centered. We're in a very sort of fear-based world right now in education. And I think that one of the most subversive things we can do is actually not enter into that fear or work against it by taking these very, very simple steps to just go outside, stay outside. And I personally believe that even in the most deprived schoolyard, there is a way in which the land can begin to speak to us, certainly to the children who are more open, perhaps maybe than we are, and we can just start to notice that and allow it to inform our responses. So I'm now really delighted to be able to introduce Maria, who is a settler on Turtle Island, daughter of Greek immigrants. Maria grew up in Ontario. She's an experienced educator in the public school system, and she's also a facilitator and curriculum consultant who works at the intersection of climate emergency, equity, racial justice, decolonization, complex problem solving, and transformative change. Maria is currently working on her PhD at OISE, and she's going to tell you more about her research and her interest in supporting youth agency and well-being. Hi, Maria, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's here tonight. And thank you to everyone at Natural Curiosity just for their work and inspiration through the years. I just wanted to start by acknowledging that I'm currently situated on land that is bound by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. And this was an agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. If I've understood it correctly, and if I'm misspeaking, I apologize as I'm continuing my own learning that is lifelong. My understanding of this covenant, the Dish with One Spoon, is that the agreement, the spirit of the agreement was that there was a recognition that this land, this fertile land, had enough. This dish contained enough for all, so long as we were very conscious of our one spoon, that we only took what we needed. We took our one spoon from that dish. And this covenant is something that I continue to try and ground myself in. And as a teacher, has been something that I try to ground my students in as well, when I'm teaching in this area, to understand that this is actually a living covenant, that this is part of the natural law that comes from the natural law that Doug was speaking about. I did also in this moment really want to acknowledge the teachers who are here, because I know that in the best of times, teachers are holding and caring so much for their students. And I recognize, and I just really want to acknowledge that I know that there is more that you are carrying right now. And it is a challenge and it is a difficult burden. And I think it's important to acknowledge it. And it's really in acknowledging the difficult things that I believe is the pathway through to the hope and to other possibilities. But we have to actually acknowledge what is real and what is challenging and what is difficult, and not always go for the positivity that actually comes through the work of the confrontation with what's difficult. So I want to acknowledge that these times of teaching are very difficult. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about my journey, just so you understand a bit about me and sort of how I've arrived to this place. And I feel like I need to tell you that when I was a little girl, the whales would speak to me. Now, I did not grow up near the oceans at all. I grew up in London, Ontario, far, far from the oceans. But the whales would come to me in my dreams, and they were in distress. And I would try to speak to people about this, but there was not a container for my dreams and for this reality that I would say, you know, the whales are speaking to me. And when I was 7 years old, I remember this really clearly. I was getting my hair cut and the hairdresser said to me, you know, what would you like to be when you grow up? And I said, I don't know where this came from, if I saw something on the news, but I said something like, I want to work for Greenpeace and save the whales. And my mother, like, truly, bless her heart, because we were, you know, at that time we were living below the poverty line. She very much wanted me to take advantage of opportunities. She said, no, she's going to go to Oxford and be a lawyer. and I feel like right there is kind of a tension within education, because those gifts of me really wanting to be with the whales and solidarity with the whales, and our education system and some of the fears and the, you know, the social conditioning, you know, those tensions, I think, have marked, you know, my educational experience. And it really wasn't until I was older that I found a space when I began to really learn, had the unbelievable privilege of learning with Indigenous knowledge keepers, where those dreams that I had as a child actually found a space and a place where they weren't laughed at, or this is, you know, silly, or you're a tree hugger, but they were understood to be very much a part of sacred knowledge. So I also want to share with you, because I have this image, and Doug spoke about it, that Greta Thunberg and a lot of youth are speaking with a lot of urgency. And I think in many ways it's because we have hit that point where the separation from the natural laws has really brought us to this place. COVID is the result of ecological violence. I mean, really, I don't think there's really a dispute about that. I mean, this pandemic is a result of deforestation at its root, and it is another manifestation of this ecological violence. When I began teaching, I remember very clearly my first year of teaching, which was in 2001, so almost 20 years ago. I began teaching about climate change. And I was confronted by a parent who worked in the extractive industry and brought a tome of research. I mean, it was a bound book. There was a lot of resources behind this book. I was a young teacher. I felt a bit vulnerable. And the message was, you need to teach both sides. And I remember feeling that this was very biased research, and it certainly wasn't in line with, first of all, my own knowing that things were off. I mean, I had that knowing as a child. So that was knowledge in my body that wasn't really mirrored by those around me. So it was my knowing, and it was also other things that I was reading and understanding. And so I come at this work not only trying to root in the body and learning about the natural laws, but I think I come by citizenship as a framework as well. And I probably come by that honestly as a Greek woman, that citizenship and democracy are things, those are some knowledges that come from my ancestors. And so citizenship is a framework that I use when I'm looking at climate change. So I have been really interested in this tension, this double bind that I found myself in as an educator. And part of that double bind was about the politicization of climate change, and it being the confusion caused by it being framed as a controversial issue for so long. And also when I would do work, so in 2008, when I did do work with students, and we actually, we did a critical inquiry, this was with grade 8 students. We researched about logging cases in different parts of Canada. We did critical inquiries about the perspectives of the loggers. We looked at the perspectives of the animals, of the trees, and we put the logging companies on trial, and it was, you know, the bears that came as witnesses, and there was a lot of research that went into that. But through these inquiries, students actually had a lot of emotion. There was a lot of affect, there was a lot of emotion, and there was a lot of grief. And I did my best to really hold that grief. I truly believe that it's giving space to that we transform it, that it's natural that we feel tremendous sadness about some of the losses ecologically and the recognition of this violence. But I often got the message of, you know, children should not be crying. They shouldn't be upset. You shouldn't be teaching things or in a way where they're expressing these kinds of upset emotions, or you're scaring the children. And I felt myself in such a double bind as an educator, because I knew that, you know, I had to teach about these things. And I also felt it was healthy to be sad about some of these difficult knowledges, and that part of my role is to help students process and us to come together in a community and do that work. And that's really what has led me to my research. My research is really about wanting to understand how, as teachers, we are responding to the climate emergency in the classroom in all of its multidimensionality. That it is not just a topic that we can clinically discuss in the science classroom and say, fossil fuels are causing an increase in carbon dioxide, and not actually get at what that means and how communities are already being affected and what the losses are. So this has really been my real commitment, is to do that work and to help us be in community together, and that we're thinking through this. So this is a question I have, is what might action, agency, and authentic hope look like? And these are just tentative ideas. These are not definitive ideas. So Rose, I'm gonna get you to go to the next slide. So some promising ways that through my own experience, through my work with other educators, and through the research that I've done, I've outlined at this moment sort of 4 principles that I think might be helpful in grounding us. So one is focusing on students' connections to land and the natural world, and I think Doug has really spoken very clearly about that tonight. Nurturing agency. So agency is this idea that the decisions you make, you can see manifest as positive actions in the world, and that you see that you can be empowered to do things and to make change in your own life, in your own community. And I think that focusing on agency is so tied to well-being. The literature is just starting to really get at that connection as a response to the increased challenges and complexity. So the more that we help students see that they have this power to enact change, the better it is for their mental health. And nurturing critical inquiry and opportunities for knowledge construction. And one that's missing is actually about coming together and doing work as a collective to enact climate justice. So having a frame of climate justice is really important. I'm not sure, it didn't make it onto my slide for some reason. And if we could just go to the next slide. So there it is, sorry, there's my 4th one. Build a sense of collective, collaborative action rooted in climate justice. So I wanted to just, for a few minutes, talk about one of these principles, which is engage students through active knowledge building pedagogies. So this is some work that I've done very deeply. I've worked with different thinking methodologies around problem solving, about nurturing critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, done work with the Critical Thinking Consortium. So this is one avenue that I've seen hold a lot of promise for engaging students in these rich inquiries. So if you could go to the next slide, Rosa. These are just some ideas of ways, pedagogies that nurture engagement, participation, construction with knowledge. And of course, natural curiosity is full of ideas in relation to this. But the engagement of students in these role plays about proposed actions. Someone in the chat was mentioning the land acknowledgement that a student wrote from the perspective of a tree. I mean, this is really beautiful. Art activities where students are collecting on their walk to school. You ask them to do on your way to school, find 5 objects that are there. Don't, cut down, like saw off a branch, but things that naturally are there that you make an offering of gratitude that you might bring into the school and do some work with, some creative work. Experiential learning, where you might invite students to actually design and implement solutions for problems relating to the land within the school community. So designing an outdoor classroom, a safety plan for natural areas, assessing possibilities for renewable energy and waste reduction, looking at root causes of issues, so helping them see the difference between donating to a cause versus grappling with root causes, and developing some powerful critical inquiries together. So in the next slide, just to wrap up, I want to give you one example right now of what this might look like. So maybe a question, an inquiry to engage the whole class with is, how should we support our safety and well-being during a pandemic? And there's rich connections here across subject areas. And I don't know that we should be as focused. I mean, don't call the curriculum police. I just feel like in these moments when we teach through the competency lens, we're going to engage so many of the curricular areas. But inviting students to this rich inquiry, and let's say one possible little challenge to ground this inquiry is to design a thoughtful and feasible plan for creating an outdoor classroom or an outdoor space, and doing that together, as opposed to all of that being on the educator. And if you go to the last slide, I mean, I know this is a little, can be unrealistic. I know in my own school grounds, you know, this might have been a challenge, but then I could also see that if I just push a little bit, we might start to find ways of doing this. And I find that the ingenuity and imagination of the students is never to be underestimated. You know, the things that we're able to do. And again, I recognize that there are constraints, but I always advocate to keep pushing and opening the space. So those are just a few ideas, and thank you again for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to having a bit more of a conversation with Doug about some of what we're talking about tonight.
Mm-hmm. Doug here, I just think this idea of engaging students in addressing existing real world problems is at the center of it. It is addressing that, someone put in a comment about solastalgia, but it's addressing the grief they feel and centering what they're going through, but also preparing them. And yeah, I wonder, and I was reading some of the teachers' comments, and they range from people who are already finding ways to have contactless activity outside to people who are challenged. And I wonder, in addressing real world problems, how much you need additional resources that aren't there. Certainly that's something I've seen. I'm doing a PhD in education at York, and one of my questions, I haven't narrowed it down, I'm one of those people, but one of my questions is, how do we, you know, schools are unnatural environments in the sense that you're sending 25 or 30 children into a room, sometimes more, with one adult. And how much and how and when do teachers need 3 or 4 more adults, and then another family of adults who have very specific knowledge that responds to the questions children have? Because it seems to me that if, you know, all the usual bureaucratic kind of challenges aside, they can be addressed. The real challenge lies in actually centering the children and centering the children's questions. It's possible to get people out on a field trip, but if we're able to somehow respond to a line of inquiry that's very specifically connected to certain subject streams, how quickly can we respond to it with expert knowledge? How quickly can we bring not just environmental science people, but lawyers, real experts? And I think the pandemic kind of provides a bit of an opportunity once we get over this phase. I mean, we're right now, I mean, principals and teachers are tearing their hair out, is what I'm hearing, because it's just so shifting and complex, and you know, it could all close, but how do we get to that point? And I think once we get over the shock of reopening, and if we can stay open, I think we've got to move very quickly to bring additional people to meet you as you're stepping outside of those schools. You're coming out, and you're you know, we've got this webinar that's inviting you to come out and do all this stuff outside. Who's going to meet you outside your door? And I will share that you know, I'd love to come back in 6 months or a year and say, this is how we met people outside the school. This is how we address some real questions. This is how the children changed how their municipal politicians think about things, maybe a little bit. We're not doing theoretical questions, abstract questions. It's not a model parliament based on a question that isn't really going to have an actual outcome in this hallways of power. The real thing that people like for our kids, which is the parents who are looking at how they support children in climate change, or the unschooling school people, the real questions that those people are asking have to do with how do we actually help children address what's really happening, and how do we actually, it's what Maria's talking about, them feeling hope has to come from them actually having an impact. I want to move away from what I saw in one of the schools where children were learning about climate change, and then they went out and shouted at their parents who were driving up to pick them up to stop driving, because it wasn't solving a problem. It was kind of presenting the parents with this image that their children were being trained to shout at them about the fact that they're racing around just trying to survive and do all the things that parents are doing. How do children address that question of maybe we shouldn't be driving? What are the solutions, and who are the people who can come in and sit outside with them, and who can they work with in the neighborhood? How do they learn about how decisions are made? How do they learn how these things unfold? Yeah.
Well, I would have loved to see in this context, I feel that it has been a missed opportunity, but it's not too late because we don't know how this is going to play itself out. But I was surprised, or what I hoped for, is that there would be much more collaboration and creativity about what education could look like in this pandemic. I mean, harnessing the outdoor spaces to a larger extent and being creative. Of course, the smaller classes, I think is really critical to all of this. And there was more that could be done so that there is flexibility. I think the larger the classes, then that flexibility does get diminished in certain ways. It's harder to just take 30 kids out into the small yard. It's a lot easier to work with 10, 15 students and be nimble. So I think that there have been some real lost opportunities, but perhaps as this continues and maybe different decisions are made, it's to really look and work together at what education can be right now, that it is offering us something. If we didn't just double down on the status quo of what we've done. There's so much possibility here.
Yeah.
I know, Doug, that this is something you're really trying to do is work with teachers to get students outside right now.
Well, and parents. So as a parent, and the woman who's doing the work along the, I'm reading comments as I speak. There's some amazing stuff coming in from the teachers and listening. But the parents are asking right now, how do we get our kids outside as well? They are asking that, the parents I'm talking to. And they're also asking about after school activity. And the ones I'm working with, I'm involved in my son's PA, but I'm starting to ask about some of the PAs in the other schools that I'm proposing to work outside with. And the parents I have talked to it's a no-brainer. Do we want our children inside all day during a pandemic? I mean, they figured that out in 1918. I mean, they took children outside and had classes outside. I mean, they put them in rows and put a blackboard in front of them, but they were doing it then, and we need to do it now. And I think the parents will support us. I think the parents will, quite a few of us as parents are off, working from home, maybe a little more flexible. we're having conversations within our, and now I'm getting really personal, but I'm having conversations with parents in my son's school about how we take our children out. And I'm challenging them to think about how they actually do stuff outside with the school, the contactless activity outside. And there's a whole lot of things that I hope to share with, because there's no time here, but how they are bringing their perspectives to, you know, teach math outside.
Well, I wanted to say too, I mean, Brenda, you had mentioned this, and I think it's a really important point when we're talking about, you know, outdoor education and environmental education. And it is that often when we think about this, it's like there's these pristine landscapes that we're supposed to take, you know, children out to. And that's not like, you know, the reality in my school is like, you know, lots of litter, and there's a train track and like broken fence and little patches of grass. And, you know, that was our reality at that time. And I think about the work of Donna Haraway, and she's written a book, you know, it's quite academic, but it's called, the title is, I think the title sort of gets at the essence, and the title is Staying with the Trouble. And it's about making kin in troubled times. And I feel like that orientation of it's with the patch of grass and the dried out grass that actually is what we need to be connecting the students to as well. Mm-hmm. And that their ability to be in relationship to that, you know, again, we underestimate the richness of learning that comes by staying with the trouble and helping them be in relationship to the damaged landscapes. I mean, I know it's not the kind of ideal when we think about nature and environmental education, but it's our reality. You know, and that is important.
If I could just add in there, Maria, someone once described the city of the TDSB as having enough land to constitute a parks department without the budget of a parks department. If we think about that in terms of outdoor education and connecting with the land, can we direct resources to having our children, our students, think about taking care of their schoolyard? Now, it might be too late for the fall. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of schools opening or not opening. Gardening programs are usually very tightly managed, very tightly controlled because of conflicting demands and needs. But this is the time to have that conversation about opening up areas of schoolyards for a deeper connection with plants and soil. But also, we have many schoolyards that have extensive green space. It might be boring, or it might seem boring, but if you do as you're suggesting, which is to calm down and sort of get centered in place, it may be that those places are actually a lot more interesting than we realize if we take the time to be there and to observe. I also want to mention that the City of Toronto, and I'm sure other cities across Turtle Island, have beautiful park systems that are not being used. And many of them have degraded ravines or areas that need agency. They need the attention of caring citizens. And this is all material for teachers to start thinking about in their local neighborhoods.
I want to share something exciting just very quickly. So when I talk about bringing additional resources to bear on surrounding our children are the hearts of our communities. And if we're bringing everything to bear on that, if that's the heart, that's the center, if we're going to stop and pivot, it's the children we're going to stop and pivot around. In order to shift how we're doing things, everything has to change now. And so when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about how we bring those people whomever we need to that. And it comes back to Isaac's video. When we're invited to go back to the land and to return to natural laws, we need not be, Anishinaabe going back onto our territory. We have to acknowledge this territory, but that really is the fulfillment of a land acknowledgement. Now, we are taking steps in the initiatives I'm involved in to connect with Treaty 13 and with Mississaugas of New Credit, and there's all these conversations going on. Teachers can't do that. I know how busy you are, but what I hope we can demonstrate this year, and we've been doing it for some time, is that having opened that door where those relationships are there, we will be there. We will be there for you. If you can get them out, we'll be out there. Now, I'm speaking for the areas I'm involved in, but I'm talking about just about every watershed in the city of Toronto. There are Indigenous people out there. And there's a comment from someone, I won't say who, but if you're still there, I replied to you privately because you mentioned, oh, well, we have this site that that's near our school that is kind of interesting for various reasons that could address some of the things that we're looking at related to grief and so on. And I messaged you privately saying, there's a bunch of us out there already in that ravine, and fire's been lit. And I have approached a school in that neighborhood, and the response was, well, we can't leave the school grounds, and we aren't allowed to have external visitors. That's not been the response with every school. The schools that are responding positively are, they'll have their challenges, but they're working to get out. I don't know how all of this is going to look by the spring, but I guarantee you, whether you're able to do it as teachers or not, we will be out there with the kids. And if it has to go through parents after school, that's the way we'll do it. And if there are ways to, help mitigate sort of the liability issues that arise with superintendents and principals, then that's how we'll do it. But the whole point being, we can't continue to break natural laws. So one of those laws, it's right there in that lighting the fire piece for the Indigenous lens. The children come from a sacred place, and they're at the center of everything, or they should be at the center of everything. They're not. And so if they were, then we would be bringing them out now, today. You would be empowered as teachers to take them out tomorrow, all day long, and all the people in the neighborhoods surrounding you and the parents, and yeah, it can't be creepy strangers, obviously. We need to have protocols in place, but they should be pouring out of the schools every day now. And we should be out there meeting them and ready to address their questions, because they're my leaders. I'm following their questions. I'm following their law. They know law. They know. And so I really want to encourage you, when you're slowing down, because I have been challenged by many, many institutional contexts, including, academia, progressive academia, they're there. I keep stopping and going, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to deal with bureaucracy. What I am going to do is recenter my approach on that question about what do we really need to do now? What do we really need to do for the children? And you will find the parents will be with you, and you know that, right? One thing I will share is there are different kinds of communities and neighborhoods and schools. There are absolutely neighborhoods and schools where there may be more of an inclination to, let's put our kids in uniforms and let's give them the 3 R's and let's not try any of that hippie stuff. That's going to be some of your contexts. And I think there are ways around that I can't get into today. But if we go to natural law, if we go to a kind of a progressive jargon, we won't reach them. if we go to natural law, and if we go to the child as the heart of the community, and if we go to what's happening with the pandemic, and if we go to safety for families and children, we will reach them.
You're so right, Doug. And again, I really feel like this is again an opportunity. You know, here's me, citizenship educator, yes, activist educator, I claim that. But you know, I think this is a real opportunity for us to push against the education system. I think people will realize we need to be outside much more. I think this pandemic has really actually shown that, has actually brought that to the surface. And we need smaller class ratios. It's just good for everybody. It lets us respond to children's needs. If we are going to put children at the center, we can't have these logics, these efficiency logics that are not about the children being at the center. And we need to push for that. And so I just keep looking for, you know, the opportunities that this government will commit to that small classes, because I think once people realize what that does, you're never going to go back. You know, this is something we should have, we know it, and we just keep dancing around it. And we want to be responsive to children. And that takes that centering, that slowing down. It's very hard to slow down when there's 34. It is difficult. You know, it's difficult to be responsive. We need more adult to student ratios in that way. So I think that's all part of this as well. I have to put that in there.
All right, I do want to cut in and just thank you all for that fantastic discussion. I think that's a really fantastic note to kind of begin to wrap us up on these ideas of community and child-centeredness and appealing to that natural law. We do have a few questions in the chat that we know we haven't been able to get to. But first, we want to ask you a couple of questions. So if you do have any burning questions after, we are going to run 10 to 15 minutes beyond 8:30, just because the discussion has been so rich to try and answer those. But before we do that, we do want to do a quick square, circle, triangle exercise. So that means we want to know from you, our participants, one thing that squared with you, circling around, pondering, maybe something you'll be chewing on over the weekend, and one thing that you really didn't quite sit right, something you might change, or something that stuck out for you in that way. We're also going to toss up a quick survey to get your general impressions of the webinar. We'll give everyone 5 minutes to do all this. I realize this is a big ask for 8:30 at night. And if you're concerned about sharing your response publicly in the chat, you can message any of those to anyone who has NC in front of their name. And that way, no one else will be able to see your replies.
Always really challenging to cut a lovely conversation with these things put into place so that we can continue to make space for these conversations. So thank you, Asha. And while folks are hopefully voting in the poll, we're trying that out for the first time and also sending us a square, circle, and triangle response. I know it's a lot, so whatever is working for you at this time is great. I do invite Doug and Maria and anyone else on the team to continue having this conversation. I know that it's hard to do both, but yeah, just to maximize your time with us. It's been so great. Thank you.
Just regarding that one, just quickly, that again, there was someone who made I don't like singling someone out in front of 100 and some odd people, but there was someone who made a comment about the place where the hurricane was in Toronto. And I did send a private message just saying, this is my email because we are out there near what you're talking about. There's a lot of land out there, and it's amazing what's happening out there. And schools are welcome. So to that person, you can step outside. If you can get outside your school, there's a lot there. Are there questions? So I'm seeing a lot of stuff coming in. I can't read it fast enough. Okay, looks like that person has my email. Thank you. Oh, she said to everyone, so okay. What Rosa, do you have a sense of what some of the sort of, I don't know if any of you, or Asha, if you've been following some of the sort of comments and questions that are coming in, or is there some specific things that are really predominant that we should address or talk about? Because I haven't had time to read them all.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot. Maybe if while folks are still putting in their circles and squares, there was a comment or a question around how to kind of get virtual learners out
Yeah.
In that kind of extremely limited community.
Well, I think there are ways to encourage them to, we're dealing with this in university classes that I teach, where we're saying, well, we can't have a class, well, I am doing classes outside, but where we can't do that, part of the course is go out in your area and look at this or that, and that would have to involve the parents unless you're in secondary. But one of the things, when I talk about bringing all these additional community resources around the children, take all those kids who are addicted to video games and social media and get them to build something. This knowledge does need to be networked. We need to, so I know in Toronto, we're going to map this. And we're going to map it with Indigenous people and elders, and we're going to have an interactive map for the whole city. And we're going to go down into history, into the past, and then we're going to plan. We're doing it with urban planning. We're going to map it into the future. And we're going to look at golf courses, and we're going to look at streets and neighborhoods, and the schools are where we bring that knowledge to life. It's not something that's led by urban planning. It has to be community led and neighborhood led. It's amazing what's happening out there. There are groups right now who are looking at what a new charter for municipalities would look like and how that is still accountable to the treaties. And, you know, there's a significant minority of people in really interesting positions who are asking those questions. And as we move forward, we can bring tech people in to actually help children use tech in a really good way. Because there's a social media documentary out now on Netflix about how destructive it really is. But the point that they make is that it can actually be used for good. And so let's use it. Let's not just have Zoom classes. Let's actually have some resource people build the capacity for all those kids who are, you know, stuck on Zoom. How do we network them? How do we get the right resources to the ones who are stuck inside, so that they're building something with somebody? You're going to need more than, as a teacher, you know, I'm not going to be able to do that by myself, you know, if I have even if I do have some technical ability, but many of us don't. So where are the nerds? Get them in there. Let's build something. Let's network knowledge.
Oh, I love that suggestion, Doug. I love the idea of partnering the kids who are getting outside, however, in whatever limited way, partnering them up with the kids who are stuck inside.
We will be doing that.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
You know, this needs to be thought through. I recognize that, but if virtual teachers made homework involving the land, like that students, you know, would go for a walk or do some kind of journaling about things, you know, in their neighborhood or outside, that, you know, and there could be choice and, you know, again, different things to consider. But if actually started to think about homework as being, you know, partly done outside in some way,
yeah,
that might be something to really consider.
Yeah. Just to plug our next two webinars, this is the second of a 4-part series, and we're going to be looking a little bit more closely again at school grounds in our next webinar. And in our final of the 4, we're going to be looking at the neighborhood as a resource, assuming that this nonsense about not being able to go off the school grounds is resolved in the next few weeks. So stay tuned for more.
Yeah, just also wanted to acknowledge all of the amazing resources, books and things to check out, videos and ideas. And so we'll try to put them all in a way that makes sense in like a resource list or a board and share them with you in an email following this webinar with the recording as well. And so for more information about the upcoming webinars, and we hope to have Krista speak with us again for a longer period of time. We hope to have Doug and Maria back, once we've had some time to grapple with what's been discussed. And so please stay connected with us and contact myself or Danielle to get some quick responses, I hope, now that there's two of us, in addition to Brenda and Haley. So it's very exciting. And oops, I am kind of spilling into the next slide just because it is 3 minutes past, and I know that your time, you've been so generous with your time with us tonight. And Brenda, do you want to take it from here to introduce our new initiative with?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that I only met you, Maria, very recently, but we had an amazing conversation, and I want to share with everyone here that I felt so enriched by this conversation about education, both from a theoretical and a practical perspective, that we decided to initiate this small group coaching program a little bit sooner than anticipated, because we thought that we would launch it with Maria as our first coach. And we would love to pull you in as well, Doug, but we know that you're way too busy. And so if any of you are interested, we're looking to set up our first small group coaching program, which would involve no more than 15 educators meeting a little bit more or less once a month, but a little bit more this year, 10 times over the academic year for 2 hours in a group of collegial friends. The idea is that you would have a tighter community of practice. Maria would be there, as well as someone from the Natural Curiosity team. We would follow up with resources, and we would be a source of support to you this year. So if you are interested in being part of this pilot project, we're only looking at one group. We might form more than one group depending on demand, but we're looking for 15 educators who would like to be part of a community of practice with Maria this year.
Thank you. I'm so excited about that.
Great. Yeah, super excited. We also, just to kind of go over some of the resources that we have available for you, coming up is Orange Shirt Day, as Krista was kind of mentioning in the development of her land acknowledgement and her work with many, many Indigenous partners. She has also helped us put together this pin board, and we really hope that it can be a resource for you. We know it kind of always sneaks up on September 30th, especially so this year. So we have a great amount of book resources, both about residential schools and Orange Shirt Day itself, as well as kind of more broader Indigenous culture and some professional development and background for you as an educator to support you in learning about what is a really, really difficult topic. Go to the next slide, please. We're also launching, we know it can be really isolating, especially in COVID, but also just being an outdoor educator or trying to achieve these things in your own school. So one of the feedbacks we got on our last webinar was that it would be really great to have a community for all of these educators to join and discuss and share resources and ask questions and really build that community of support I'm really glad you kind of brought up how social media can be used for good, Doug. Very much hoping that this can be an occasion to do that. So if you would like to join us, we are launching a Natural Curiosity Educator Slack. Slack is an online messaging board. We have one for general discussions, one for resource sharing, essentially like a forum. And you can register there. Taylor has shared our link in the chat. So thank you all very much. We can hope that like all of those resources are super useful to you in providing some support. Hand it over to Rosa to close us out.
And I just always want to honor the French educators. We hear from you. We see your comments sometimes wondering about a French webinar. And so we just wanted to acknowledge that and let you know that we are thinking about that. We are, again, a very small team trying to provide as much as we can. And so thank you if you're here tonight. And I just wanted to say Chi-miigwetch to all of our guests, all of our participants. Thank you everybody for everything you've contributed. And yeah, we're looking forward to more of this online and through the webinars and through coaching. Yeah, and I have reached out to Doug and Maria beforehand, and they did say that they're available for a few more minutes. And so as folks are leaving, if you're still here, thank you. Maria and Doug, or any final thoughts or comments you want to share? And if not, we will close this webinar. Brenda, have anything to add?
No, just thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening, and thinking of you and wishing you all the best, as you continue this really critical work in these challenging times.
And thank you, Doug and Maria, for sharing your thoughts with us and being so generous with your time.
And yeah, and I just want to really say again, like, take care. I know it sounds kind of impossible, but slow down, because the sort of vortex of activities, like, it has a still center, and take care of yourselves.